For over 50 years, Kevin Seymour has enjoyed being a part of many facets of the harness racing industry. He really has seen it all. Now, he alongside his wife Kay are enjoying a golden period in the sport, headlined by their star pacer leap to fame. I sat down with Kevin to find out where it all began. Well, Mr. Seymour, let's go right back to the start of your life as a child, growing up. What was your family dynamic? Was there interest in horses? Tell us about way back when.
Well, I guess that's pretty simple. Absolutely no interest in horses whatsoever, and I was going to become a professional golfer. That was going to be my career.
So sport and I guess the competitive nature of sport was something that took your interest?
Not really, no. It all sort of developed from working at Egmont Park as a young 20-odd-year-old with a group of young fellows that we decided we wanted to get a part-time job to supplement our income. And there was three of us. One was Graham Hart, who finished up the CEO of Bank of Queensland. The second was John Hollenby, who finished up as the Managing Director of the Bank of Scotland. And I was the only disaster.
I'm not so sure about that. We'll talk about your business endeavours very shortly. But so why Egmont Park? Was it something that just came up and was available and was close by, or what was the, I guess, the pull towards that place?
Yeah, it was handy for us, and it was a job that a couple of nights a week, and the pay in those days was quite reasonable. Yeah, no, we just found it as a good part-time income and something that we could help develop the financials for our family going forward.
So back in school, were you interested in school? Was that something that you enjoyed?
I hated it. I hated school. I mean, I was never academic. I was always somebody that was looking for opportunities. You know, I spent my time at Parramatta High School in Sydney, and I couldn't wait to get out on the golf course because my passion at that stage was golf. And I used to slip home of an afternoon and straight at the golf course to do some practice rounds.
So the move to Brisbane and Queensland, when did that occur?
That was when I was about 16. I was a reasonably good golfer in those days, and I'd represented New South Wales for my employer, Ampol, in golf, and the Queensland manager noticed me and said, look, if I offered you a really good job and on good terms and conditions, would you come to Queensland and represent Queensland? And that's all how it all came about. They billeted me with a family, the Coburn, Dr. Coburn and his family in Brisbane, and that's how I started my career in the state. So
what was the, I guess, then process with golf? Did it peter out when other things became more important, or when, and I'm sure that you probably still play a little bit of golf if that was such a passion back then, but when did that sort of disappear from your life, so to speak?
I think my career overtook the golf. In those days there wasn't a lot of money for golf. When you turned professional, you made a living, but that sort of was, and as you know, but times have changed, and today it's a very, very good career. But no, my business career blossomed at that stage. I won quite a lot of awards for Ampol, and silly as it might sound, we won the Opera House Lottery, a group of us at Ampol, and that also helped further my career with being able to buy a car and do a few other things, of buying a house and things. So we were just lucky at that stage to have been in that position.
So back to your, I guess, roots at Egmont Park and where that all began. So you were selling race books, I believe you said. So when did it go a step further than just that? How long were you in that role for, and was it the bright lights and the horses that took your attention? Sort of tell us a bit more about that period.
Yeah, I'm not afraid to say I was a good race book seller. I used to sell quite a few. But I became very friendly with the chairman of stewards, Jack Gregg, at the time. And I can remember saying to him, Mr. Gregg, I'd love to own a horse. You know, I think it'd be fantastic to be able to race a horse. And he came to me sometime later and he said, there's a guy from Sydney called Ken Cummings. He's got a horse here called Crazy Chief. He said he wants to sell it. He only wants $2,000 for it. And I said, yeah, gee, that sounds a good opportunity, but I really haven't got the money at the present time. What I've got is I've got $200, which is a deposit on a lounge suite that Kay has sent me down to buy for her. I wonder if I put that money on the horse and put it on the nose, would I get enough to pay for the horse? And he said, go and have a look in the betting ring and see what sort of price it is, which I snuck out and I had a look, and it was 10 to 1. And I thought, now, if I put the $200 on, I'll get $2,000. I'll be able to pay for the horse. Kay won't know, and I'll keep it very quiet.
Buy the lounge suite anyway.
So I said to Mr. Gregg, I said, can I change the driver? He said, oh, it's a bit late at this stage to change the driver. He said, the driver is Jack Southgate, and he's not a bad driver. And I said, okay. So the driver stayed the same, and it was a wet night. And I can remember Jack Southgate put his head down, got the whip coming down the straight, and was whipping the horse. And the story, of course, is now the horse won. It paid 10 to 1, and that's how I got involved in racing.
Well, that's a fantastic story. So, really, looking back now, if the horse hadn't won on that occasion, it could have been a very different path.
It could have been. I don't like the thought of divorce, but I think that might have been on the cards.
Tell us a bit more about Kay and when you met, where you met, and you've had a beautiful, long relationship. She's a wonderful lady, and she's very well loved in the industry as well. So tell us a bit more about Kay.
Yeah, I was posted to Maryborough with Ampol, and we met in Maryborough. Neither of us had any interest in racing at that stage, and it's only when we came back to Brisbane that we really got involved. You know, we started off with 1 or 2 brood mares, and we got involved with Ron Pointer and Mark Aitken and Mark Litchmark, and we started off Egmont Park Stud. And that was a great partnership and lovely people to be involved with. And we sort of built our interest in racing from that stage onwards. And it was a great time. It was, you know, sort of the best days of harness racing, the big crowds at Albion Park. I can remember we had, at one stage at Albion Park, 70 bookmakers in the betting ring. That's how big the sport was in those days.
So Kay's passion for the sport, has it grown? Was she really interested when starting out as you were?
I think she probably was the driving force. I mean, she loved the breeding side. She loved the racing aspect of it. It took us a long time to make any really headway. You know, it's a long-term thing, as you know, breeding, and we found it fairly tough going for a while. You know, a couple of times we nearly gave up because we couldn't breed anything of any consequence at all. But we kept persevering, and that's where we are today.
So we've spoken about that first horse. When did it become more significant? When did it start to grow?
Oh, it took some years. The worst that could have happened was that horse won that first night. I think that was probably the start of a difficult time. But it took quite some time for us to gather together a group of broodmares. We first got really involved with a fellow called Norman Pearce from New Zealand, and he was a doyen of breeding. And I went to Norman and I said, look, Norman, we've got all these ordinary broodmares. We need to get something decent to become a foundation for our stud. And Norman picked out 2. One of the 2 is the real foundation mare of our whole breeding operation. and it was called Call Girl, you know, and produced Good Looking Girl, Gold Rush Girl, and all those horses. And if you look at our breeding barn at the present time, a lot of those horses trace back to Call Girl.
Well, that is, I guess, one of those turning moments when a horse like that walks into your care. Just on, I guess, and we'll get to the breeding very shortly, but your business endeavours outside of harness racing, you've obviously been a very successful businessman. In terms of your career in that respect, and I know that you're still very involved in several of your businesses, it must be nice to have harness racing as an outlet, because I would assume a lot of it was pretty all-consuming.
Yeah, I guess one of the things is that I could say that harness racing has been very good to me back in the early days when I was starting to get established in business. Through harness racing I made a lot of good contacts and a lot of really nice people, and that was designing part of the future of the business empire. A lot of those people, we try to get involved in the sport and to buy horses, which we did. I think you might recall a horse called Avondale Special was made up of a syndicate of people we put together. We try to use that to promote the sport and to get a lot of people involved. And as you probably know, the future of the sport now, as I see it, is syndication. It's getting too expensive for people to own horses individually, and yet we need to be, as a sport, very similar to thoroughbreds. You don't see individuals owning thoroughbreds anymore. They're all owned by syndicates. And I think we have to promote and maximise that.
Why was it a choice of harness racing over thoroughbred racing for you? Does it trace back to being there at Egmont Park, or has there been opportunities when you've decided, oh, maybe I'll give this a go as well, but it's always led back to harness racing?
I'd like $1 for every time that I think back. The number of people have asked me that same question, Brittany. You know, people say, well, you're a successful business person, you can afford to buy thoroughbreds, why aren't you into the big money? Well, you're right. I mean, it does trace back to the first horse I had, but I also think of the fabric of the industry. I mean, there are so many good people in harness racing. You know, I often think of harness racing people as salt of the earth. They're genuine. What you see is what you get. And I just love, generally, Kay and I both love the sport.
And you're still there at Egmont Park most Saturday nights watching your horses go around, and is that why you're still so interested in the sport? I know on a few occasions I've thought you were scaling back, but you seem to be, at the moment, going as strong as ever.
Yeah, well, I'm having a purple patch on it at the moment.
That helps.
And we've never had it so good. I mean, it's taken me until I've become 84 to reach that level. But no, it's funny. We get as much thrill out of winning an ordinary race as we do out of winning a feature race. We love our horses. We love to see their progress. And we were talking about a horse before, Fire Razor. You know, he's no bigger than a Shetland pony, basically. And people look at him and say, you know, why would you race a little horse like that? Well, as you've seen, he's obviously got a huge, big heart. Honestly, Grant Dixon said to me, Kev, the trouble is with Fire Razor, he doesn't know that he's small. He thinks he's like everyone else. And he's doing such a good job. And we really have got a soft spot for him.
To drill down a little bit more on Egmont Park Stud and Gold Rush Lodger and that part of your harness racing journey. Do you remember the circumstances of acquiring that, and you still have it to this day?
Yeah, we've been there for 50 odd years. It's a long time, and I've got to give credit to the people that have been running it for us. You know, Mark Litchwark did a fantastic job. Peter Bell's been there now for a long period of time, and his loyalty and devotion to it has been amazing. You know, we've now got Dale Forbes, who's just joined us, and he's another devoted horseman who loves his horses. Well, the whole family love their horses. and both Dale and Megan work for us. I think it's the people that you get around you that make life so good and do such a good job on the farm. The farm looks immaculate. The horses are kept, no expense spared to make sure the horses are looked after. And, it's part and parcel of our life. I mean, it's as important to us as the business side of the enterprise.
In terms of the farm, and obviously it's about probably 2 hours for you to get there, how often do you head up and see it, and how involved are you in the day-to-day running, whether it be knowing when foals are born, do you get a call, breedings, and that side? Are you still very involved, or do you have such great people around you that you can just sit back and enjoy a little bit more?
Yeah, well, as I said, we're lucky we've got the good people. Unfortunately, that, as you may or may not know, I'm now legally blind, which means I can't drive and I can't get to the farm as often as I'd like to. But that doesn't stop us being involved in it, being involved in the decision making, and sort of talking about the future breeding, what we're going to breed and what we're not going to breed, the size we're going to go to. We just love being involved in that part of it. And being taken on that journey by the wonderful staff we've got.
Breeding is not an easy game. It's a long road and there's often quite a few challenges. What have you learnt in the last 50 or so years of breeding harness racing horses, or are you still learning?
Well, I guess I've learnt that original saying that they said to me some 40 or 50 years ago, you put the best and hope for the best. And I think that's what breeding's all about. It's not a science. I don't think that you can ever design things that you're going to get champion horses out of certain matches of broodmares. I think you've got to stick to the best quality horses you can afford and put them to the best size. And I think then it's a process of elimination to see which of those are going to perform well. Of all my breeding, I can honestly say I've never done as well as I'm doing at the present time with Grant Dixon going to the Sydney sales and selecting horses out of the sales for me. If you look at the performance of those horses, it far outstrips my breeding activities over the years.
I'm sure that it's still pretty special when you breed one that goes on to win a few Group 1s like you did the other night. Do you get a little more enjoyment out of that, or do you just like winning no matter the circumstance?
Well, you do. But, I've never bred, we were talking about the Grand Circuit horse and that, but I've never bred a horse that's gone on to win many Grand Circuit races. I've had to import Mr. Feelgood. I've had to get Grant to buy the horse Leap to Fame. But those little wins are sweet. Everyone strives to win a size stakes and things like that. We get as much thrill, as I said, out of winning an ordinary race as we do, and we're still so excited about the sport. We've never lost that enthusiasm and the excitement that we get out of winning races.
Well, you've got a really good bunch of 2-year-olds this year, many of which you've bred, so who knows, that Grand Circuit star could be amongst them. In terms of breeding and in Queensland, how have you seen that side of the business develop? Are we, as good a place as we have been as breeders in this sport at the moment with the Q-bred scheme?
Yeah, I think that the catalyst has been the Q-bred scheme. I think that's encouraged people to breed better horses and take more risks in breeding. And of course it's allowed people interstate to buy Queensland horses to race them here. I think our racing of juveniles is as good as it's ever been.
No, I agree. It's certainly a real carrot for people to become involved. An important part of breeding is stallions, and you've been right at the forefront in many aspects, whether it be standing your own or shuttling stallions from America. Do you remember where your interest in the American side of the sport came about? Because you're clearly quite attuned to what happens across there.
Yeah, if you think back over the years, our greatest acquisition was buying a Meadow Skipper horse called Land Grant. He was the richest Meadow Skipper at that stage. and we brought him out, and he was reasonably successful, not a superstar. It wasn't until Mark Litchmark picked up Fake Left for us that we really sort of made any headroads into breeding.
Fake Left was a breed changer, really, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was a game changer as far as breeding was concerned. I mean, Mark was very astute in picking him out, but he really made the start, and he made the future of racing for us.
And he's still having big ramifications going forward as well. Many of his broodmares are doing wonderful things also. What about Mr. Feelgood? Can you tell us the Mr. Feelgood story?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. You know, when we decided to buy an American Stallion, I wanted to internationalise racing in Australia. I thought I could change the fabric of our racing operations. I thought if I bring a horse out from America to race in the Inter-Dominions and show how good they are. But all the cynics told me, well, they're only speedy squibs, they only race over a mile, and they'll never be any good for our feature races, which are over the longer distance. And I thought about it, and I thought, well, someone's got to try it. I might as well be the first to make that effort. And as you know, I brought him out from America. Tim Butt went over and finalised the negotiation for us. And he came out to Australia, and he was a sensation over the longer distance. I mean, there's probably no better horse over those longer distances. And as you know, he won the 2009 Inter-Dominion at the Gold Coast.
Do you remember that night? And
how could I forget it? I was so lucky, and this is where getting good people around you is very important. Peter O'Shea from Sydney bought a half share in the horse, and you could never find a better partner in a horse ever than Peter O'Shea. He's been sensational. We still own Mr. Feelgood, and we put him out to pasture. But he was such a great man to have in a horse. He loves his horses. He's prepared to pay up for them. And to win the number of Grand Circuit races that Mr. Feelgood won was just so exciting for both of us. But to set a new standard, to bring that horse out, and I only wish right now that we could do the same thing and have those international competitions.
Yeah, certainly. It would make for some amazing racing just on that night itself. And I guess it's probably a different position, much like the one you're in at the moment with Leap to Fame, a Queensland champion that everybody loved was Black's a Fake, and you caused a big upset. I'm sure that you were still happy to cause that upset, though.
In the Inter-Dominion? Well, I sort of had two thoughts about that. I mean, Black's a Fake was going for his fourth Inter-Dominion, and we were just lucky. We got up on the fence and pipped him at the post. I would have liked Black's a Fake to have won the 4 Inter-Dominions, because I don't think anyone in the future would have ever equalled that. Having said that, on the other side of the coin, the prize money was lovely, the glory was lovely, and the fact that it proved that I could bring an American horse out and he'd be competitive over the long journey was very important to me.
Nice bit of justification for your efforts as well, I'm sure. You've had great success in, I guess, being involved in harness racing as a breeder and an owner, but you've also had some really important positions as an administrator, and you've been a very, very important part of the fabric of the industry with your sponsorship. How important has that been in your lifetime to give back to the sport as you have?
Yeah, everyone talks about giving back and things like that, but putting money into the sport, for me, was not that important, because I love the sport and I enjoy it and I like the people in it. I mean, the sort of things that we did were revolutionary, I suppose. You know, providing tons of feed of a Saturday night for trainers. You know, providing Coles vouchers for food and gift baskets and things like that at Egmont Park was our way of sort of showing people we appreciate their support and trying to help them as much as we could. We went through a dark time in harness racing in Queensland, and You know, when we lost the 15-year agreement, we had 14.5% of the turnover. We went back from 14.5% to 9.5%. Was a really tough time, and I found at that stage that I wanted to be able to help people and get over that bit of a hurdle. Because my wife will probably be watching this program, I dare not say how much we contributed at that time, but it was quite substantial.
I'm pretty sure she would have supported it though. She's a great person as well. But in terms of some of those administrative roles that you held, and we were very lucky that you had obviously a very smart business hat on, but you also knew the sport. How important was that to be able to draw on those two things to implement successful, whether it be strategies or new initiatives?
Yeah, harness racing went through some good times in Queensland and some bad times. I like to think of the good times rather than the bad times. When we had the old stand and we had Silk's restaurant, they were boom times for harness racing. We were able to bring people in, business people in and make them part of the sport, give them part ownership, and the sport really skyrocketed at that stage. I think it was important that we sort of sold the sport to the wider Queensland community, which we were able to do at that time. You know, we got a lot of business people involved, we got the politicians involved, and everyone wanted to be part of the sport, and we had the good facilities. Then we went through the time when the stand, because of structural defects, had to be demolished, and we were left with substandard facilities. They were tough times for the sport. It's only in recent times that we've started to make some progress with increased prize money. My greatest delight will be when the sport can have a world-class facility, which we've been promised. If we get back to that stage again, that'll be the happiest day of my life.
Well, here's hoping for everybody involved. I remember vividly sitting in a room at Egmont Park, what would it be now, maybe 6 or 7 years ago, and there was a group of young people that you invited. I think it was a Friday night, if my memory serves me correctly, and you sat us down and we went through a process of how we can make ourselves better participants in whatever chosen field that may be. And you offered each of us $15,000 to go out and buy a horse. That was a pretty amazing thing at the time, and I still look back on it very fondly, and the experiences that I learnt, not only from racing the horse, but managing and negotiating with owners and that. Where did that idea come from?
Well, I've always believed that the young people in the sport are the future. And that's why I took them on trips to New Zealand for the New Zealand Cup.
That was a fun trip, wasn't it?
Well, I think it was a lot of fun, particularly when the windscreen wiper at the back used to keep coming on.
Or we took you through the McDonald's drive-through.
And my first time in McDonald's. But, you know, just to take them over to show, a lot of them didn't have passports. They had to get passports. But to show them the way that racing operates in other countries, as you know, we competed against the New Zealand junior drivers. And that was part and parcel. But more importantly, it was getting back to your stage that I tried to give them some business advice and things like that. And I look back at the people that were involved at that time. You know, and Pete McMullen is a great example. Pete was a very shy young guy at that time. You know, he wouldn't communicate unless you sort of drew him into the thing. You look at him today, you know, probably our leading trainer in Queensland, and he and Chantel are doing a fantastic job. And there's all the other people, and I won't mention anyone else because I don't want to embarrass people, but, you know, we made that young group of people into something, I think, a bit special in their own fields. I would have loved to run that Channel 7 program that we had continually. I tried to convince the authorities to make that part of the curriculum for young people joining the sport. I think there's all those things that we can do to grow the young entrants coming into the sport. I'm worried that we haven't got a facility at the present time where young people can get involved. You know, my great passion's always been to set up a training facility where we can provide small parcels of land for young people that they can, sort of build a house and stables on. I think there's a great opportunity to get a lot. It doesn't have to only be young people, but to get a lot more people involved in the sport if we make it the point of entry, sort of relatively cheap to get involved in. The average young person today can't afford to go and buy a big property, put a training track in and maintain it.
Let's talk more about some of the great horses that you've had. Now, I've got a list here that I'll read from a little while ago. Famous Forever, Masked Crusader, Good Looking Girl, you've already touched on, Aqua Gold, Tasco and Gold Rush Girl. They're some great horses. You're saying that you're enjoying the best part of your harness racing career right now, but when you look back and I guess reflect on what some of those horses have done, it's been pretty good right the way through, hasn't it?
Yeah, but I think you've, in being fair, you've got to consider we've probably bred 3,000 horses. That's only a small percentage of them. They have been nice horses, and they've been horses that we've got a lot of enjoyment out of. But statistically, I don't think you'd say that I'm a very successful breeder.
I think you've done okay, but I understand where you're coming from. You put a lot in, so you're much more than deserving of getting some back. Majestic Mac and Colt 31 were some other really, really nice horses. Colt 31 won a Grand Circuit race. Majestic Mac was an amazing young horse.
Yeah, they were both lovely horses. From a Queensland point of view, they were up there with some of the best of them. And they gave us a lot of excitement and a lot of thrill. I'm just hoping that Colt 31 turns out to be a great sire. He's from a fantastic family, as we all know, and I bred quite a few of my mares to him in the last couple of years. So we'll see how he goes in the siring barn.
And that will be really exciting to see how it plays out. I just want to touch, before we move along to the current superstar and leap to fame, on the naming of these horses. And I think a good horse needs a good name. It just goes hand in hand. And I believe Kay's involved in the naming of these horses.
I can't take credit for any of those things. She selects the names. She goes to a lot of trouble. I mean, it's just amazing when you get a lot of horses how hard it is to find suitable names. And she comes up with some crackers. I mean, they are some fantastic names. And
is it the first letter of the horse is the first letter of the dam?
Yeah. So she's got to match that up. Probably the best of them, I think, and I'm probably biased, but I think Leap to Fame is a fantastic name. She's done a really good job there.
So apt, isn't it? It just works. It really does. Let's talk about him now, because he is the talk of harness racing. He's an amazing champion, and we're so lucky to have him racing so consistently, and still hopefully have many seasons of his racing to come. But you mentioned Grant going to the Sydney sales, and is this a process you've put in place that you say to Grant, I want to target this sale, can you go and buy me one or two each year?
No.
No?
Unfortunately. No, what I say to Grant is, it's up to you. If you want to go to the Sydney sales, you can go and buy me a couple of horses. And Grant's he's a master understatement, but he's a very cautious sort of person. And he says, well, the problem is when I go to the Sydney sales, other people are looking at me all the time, and if I bid on one, they all bid against me because of the success I've had now. And he says, I don't want to pay too much. And I say, well, what do you mean by not paying too much? He said, I try and pay 25 or 30,000 for them. And I say, Grant, you're never going to buy a nice horse for 25 or 30,000. But then I look back at the horses you bought, and I mean, Fate Awaits is a good example. You paid 27,000 for it. He's done a remarkable job at buying horses and producing horses that can perform and punch above their weight.
Absolutely. There's more to it than just buying them, but he nurtures them from that day forward. And I know you have a great team up there on the Darling Downs that go through the breaking in process. I think that year it was Leap to Fame and Tim's a Trooper. So it's a pretty good 1-2 punch. But on Leap to Fame, if my memory serves me correctly, I think he might have made a mistake at his first start. But when did Grant tell you, or did it take a little longer than that, that we might have something a bit more than special here?
Yeah, well, the process starts with Toby Reith, who breaks him in at the stud. And Toby's pretty good. He can always tell me what horse he thinks is got above average ability. And he always said with Leap to Fame, he knew that he was a really nice horse. How good he wasn't too sure, but he said he believes he's above average. And I think Grant had much the same opinion. It's always hard with these young horses to know how far they're going to go because, as you know, they go so far and then they hit a brick wall or they slow down or whatever they might be. And it's not until probably you get them to the races you really know that you've got that horse with a big motor that's going to produce the goods for you.
He had a relatively light 2-year-old year. He was certainly promised a lot, and it was pretty clear that he had above average ability. I think Robbie Morris still to this day shakes his head how I think he had a drive at Menangle and he wasn't able to qualify him for the Breeders' Challenge Series, so that's going to live with Robbie for a little while. But as a 3-year-old, things got pretty serious pretty early on. He won those 3 derbies. Where did that sit at that time for you?
I think any time you've got a horse good enough that can win the East Coast derbies, that's got to be a thrilling time for you. I always say that a horse that performs well in the derbies will go on, hopefully without sort of any breaking down or anything like that, will go on to be a really nice open class horse. And when he won those, I mean, that was probably the pinnacle of our success, was that to have a horse that could win 3 Eastern derbies. We'd never had it before, even though that Colt 31 won the Victorian Derby for us. So he went on from there, and Grant's done never underestimate how good a job Grant's done. He's done a fantastic job on the horse by managing the number of starts he's had and looking after him. You know, he said to me early in the piece, Kev, if you let me manage the horse and give me an open go at doing that, I'll make sure that he's got longevity for you. And that's, I think, purely what he's achieved at this stage. And barring any accidents or anything like that, he looks as though he's going to go on for quite a few years.
Yeah, he's hoping. So New South Wales Derby, he dominated on that occasion. The Queensland Derby was very hard fought. He had to do it the tough way. And then leading into that Victorian Derby, I think everybody was hoping that he could achieve the Triple Crown, so to speak. How did you feel going in? I think he may have even been beaten in the heat by Captain Ravishing, but when you come final time, again, Grant would have him spot on.
Yeah. Look, my greatest fear, and it is a fear, is that he gets beaten. And the reason that fear is there, that I know a lot of people back him, and a lot of people just put money on him to say they've had a win on Leap to Fame. And I hate the thought of him ever getting beaten. It's terrifying. I go to the race, and the thing I worry about, of all the things that are happening, is that he may get beaten on that occasion.
Let's move on to his 4-year-old year. And speaking of being beaten, we don't like to bring it up, but that Black's a Fake, where he copped the flat tyre at about the 300-metre mark. How did you feel that night? Because it was an odd feeling, wasn't it? Because I remember Grant pulling up not long after the line, turning around, and I actually believe he might have even been given a round of applause by the crowd as he walked back, carrying the sulky with the tyre fouled around the wheel. It must have been hard.
Well, they say in racing, there's always another way of getting beaten. And you never anticipate, you know, the tyre being flattened, but worse still, it's wrapped around the wheel so the wheel doesn't turn. And I was disappointed that he was beaten, obviously. You know, you build up your expectations. And then when I had a look at the tyre, and Grant then showed me the wheel wouldn't turn, and I was probably deflated, I guess. But then I turned around and said, well, you know, how could any horse have won that race with an impediment like that? Not take anything away from the winner. He won fairly and squarely, and he did a great job. But there's still disappointment when you run into obstacles like Grant did that night.
Fast forward about 6 months later and he lines up in an Inter-Dominion, and it feels like, well, it was the rematch between the two brothers, and it had such a faultless Inter-Dominion campaign so far. You'd obviously enjoyed success in the race before, but tell us about the build-up, because we now know you had your own challenges through that time.
Yeah, I don't like to think back about that. And people said at the time I was emotional, which I obviously was. I'd been in hospital only a fortnight before. I'd had a heart attack. I laid there and I thought at the time, well, of all the things I'm looking forward to seeing this horse race in the Inter-Dominion, and I might never make it. And that was what was going through my mind. And if you could imagine, and it's hard for people to imagine, but the relief to be there on the night and to see the horse win, and think back about what I'd been through. I certainly did be affected by it.
No doubt. What about at the top of the straight? You're watching, he's roared away from his opposition. You must have been able to really enjoy it. It's not often you get to enjoy race wins of that magnitude, but he just dominated his rivals.
He did. It was a great win. And to win in front of your own home crowd, I think, is something special. You know, an Australian-bred horse to win the race. And the fact that he's loved by Queenslanders. And what we try and do is that, and we've done this wherever we've gone, is try and take him to the outlying tracks, you know, the Redcliffs and the Newcastles and all those sort of tracks that we've been to, just to share him around with the public and give them an opportunity to have a look at him race.
We know he's then gone on to win a Hunter Cup, a Miracle Mile. He's got that Black's a Fake on his CV now as well. And you mentioned the support for him. I don't think I've experienced in my time in harness racing a horse that is so universally loved. You know, there's often horses that some people love and some people have another choice, but it just seems participants, other owners, other competitors, everyone seems to love this horse. Why do you think that is?
Well, I think it's really stirring when the horse comes down the straight and everyone, to a man, is out there cheering him. I think as an owner, you know, you feel exhilarated. You're so excited yourself that everyone else is enjoying his racing. But I think they've taken him into their hearts and said, well, he's part of the Queensland fabric, and we have part of him. We want to go and watch him race. I mean, at Egmont Park, when he races in those events like, you know, the Black's a Fake, you know, the crowd swells. I mean, I've never seen so many people in the front of the grandstand for the presentation. It was amazing.
Yeah, it's really lovely to see as a harness racing devotee, so to speak. It's wonderful to see other people enjoying it as much as we do. And I don't want to harp on the fact, but just going back to that Inter-Dominion, do you think him being in the position that he was at the time, you in the position that you were, in some way did he help you through?
Well, I think it's fate. I think at the time I was, you know, sort of worried not being able to get to the track to see him race, and then to see him win so convincingly, I couldn't believe it. As you know, I was lost for words. I could not believe that he would win the race so convincingly on that night. It was beyond all my expectations.
Yeah, it was amazing. He is amazing, and you've said to me on a few occasions he's not going to stud yet. I would hope those conversations haven't even started. Do we get to see him for a little while longer?
Yeah, we've had and I think I might have mentioned this to you before, we've had a number of inquiries from America about, you know, whether we'd take him to America and compete against their best horses. But what I've said to the Americans, and I think this is important, you know, why should we have to go to America to prove that we've got the best horse? Why don't the Americans come out to Australia? And I've tried to encourage a couple of American owners to bring the horse out and compete in Australia. I mean, look at it. We've got the richest race in the world. You know, we've got miracle miles of $1 million. We're talking about inter-dominions of $1 million. The Americans haven't got any better prize money over there. So why don't they come out here, if they think they're so good, and compete against us?
I like it. I like that idea very much. You've spoken of the job that Grant Dixon's done with this horse, and he and Trista are quite the dynamic team, and they train the majority of your horses these days, and you've had some great relationships with lots of people along the way, but this has been so ultra successful. What do you think makes them such great trainers? Dedication.
I think they're probably one of the most dedicated training teams in Australia. Anyone I speak to, they always speak highly of the Dixons as quality trainers, knowledgeable trainers, but most important, dedicated. I mean, both Grant and Trista, and the kids are important too in the whole process. They love the horse. You've never seen people so proud of being the trainers of a horse as what the Dixon family are. And really, it's made them as trainers, as a part of the Australian harness racing industry. No one is better known now than the Dixons. You take your Emma Stewarts and everyone like that, and they're great trainers, don't get me wrong, but the Dixons have become synonymous now with harness racing through the deeds of Leap to Fame.
Tell us about your family and their interest in the sport. I often see yourself and Kay at the races, but I've started to see a few more people pop up in the posse. Are they starting to believe in the game, and is this horse piquing their interest?
I really don't think so. I mean, I've got to be honest. The kids don't have much interest in horses, and what sort of probably hurts us more is that once we're not around, I don't know whether the kids will continue the horses. They like the glory and the glamour of the Leap to Fame, ride and the story. But I don't think it'll be long term. I think that, unfortunately, it'll probably be the end of a dynasty when we're not about.
Well, we've still got a bit of time to twist their arm, hopefully, between now and then. What about your future plans? You've mentioned the fact that you're enjoying probably a golden era for yourself and Kay in your harness racing journey, not only Leap to Fame, but a great group of 2-year-olds this year and a few other really nice horses. Do you just continue to look for the next Leap to Fame?
Well, how do I answer that? Probably I should start off by telling you, and it's no secret, over the last 50 years, I've never made a profit out of harness racing. This is the first year, in the 51st year, that I've turned it into a profit. So when we say we're having a stellar year and we're having an exciting year, it is exciting. We'll probably plough that profit back into the stud and do the improvements and things like that. I think if this continued, and we're all dreamers in harness racing, and I dream that will happen. If we can continue for another year or so, that will be fantastic. But I'm probably a realist at the same time and thinking, well, maybe it won't go beyond the year. But I'd love to think that we could get another horse. I think it's probably impossible or improbable that we'll ever get another horse as good as Leap to Fame. We get excited, as everyone does, and horses like Fatal Waits and that, we hope that he'll continue on and develop into a nice horse. And of course we hope that Grant will keep going to the yearling sales. I mean, I keep saying to people all the time, instead of buying tried horses from New Zealand, why don't you go to the yearling sales and buy a yearling? Grant went to the yearling sales and spent $60,000 in the year he bought Leap to Fame, and bought Tim's the Trooper, and now they've won $3.7 million between them. What better advertisement can you get than to buy yearlings at the yearling sales and convert it into something like that?
Yeah, it's what dreams are made of, isn't it? Definitely.
It is.
What are your hopes for harness racing? I'm sure you still think day and night about what can be done to improve the sport, or what you think would work to, we've already mentioned, maybe a facility for young people to be able to start their harness racing careers. If I was to ask you what your wishes were for the sport going forward, do you think about that?
I do, and I've agonised over that quite a bit. I mean, to give you an example, South Australia was my real issue. South Australia Harness Racing Club looked like it was going to fold. It had 15 years of continual losses, no profit in that time. The sport was going nowhere in South Australia. So I said to myself, well, look, if someone doesn't do something positive and we lose South Australia, I think that's the beginning of the end. And that's how I became involved in the reconstruction of both the club, the prize money, and trying to secure the future for the participants in South Australia. And it's, everyone knows what's been done over there in the way of developing the surplus land, increasing the prize money, creating feature races, and really re-energising the sport in the state. My biggest fear is that the money that they'll make out of the redevelopment, which we're doing for them, that they won't invest it wisely. I'm paranoid about the fact that I want to make sure that that capital that they make out of the development is invested wisely for the future of the sport. Not for 3 or 4 or 5 years, but will maintain the sport for the next, say, 50 years. And that's why I'm doing it. Everyone says to me, Kev, you're crazy. You're spending all this time, you're putting all this effort into it. But I've done that purely for the future of the sport.
You love harness racing?
I do.
Do you still think for people wanting to become involved that there's a future in the sport?
I do. I think we need to become more professional about the way we're managing it. And we need to create more of these large prize money races, because what that does in turn is it makes people think, well, I should be involved in the sport. I'm a business person, I've got a few bob to spend. Why don't I invest it in harness racing? If you look at all the business people who are investing in galloping, it's just amazing that the people from different parts of society that are putting their money into galloping. We should be able to do that in harness racing. What we need to do is get those larger prize money races and show them that there's a future in the sport. We won't do it by just appealing to our current participants. We need to bring more people with us on the journey, and that will create the foundation for growing the sport.
Yeah, absolutely. No, they're great points that you make, and here's hoping we can see some of that occur. My final question. In time, what do you want to be remembered for in harness racing? What is your legacy?
Probably winning the Inter-Dominion with an Australian bred horse. No, I don't think that way. I mean, I think of the enjoyment I've got out of it, the people I've met, what harness racing's done for me. I don't believe a person like myself should think about what I've done for harness racing. I like to think about what harness racing has actually done for Kay and myself.
Well, thank you for all that you've done for harness racing, as much as maybe you don't want to think about that. Thank you for sitting down with me, and it's been really enjoyable.
It's been a pleasure, Brett.